Sir Edward Denny and the Chronology of Redemption. One of Sir Edward's great contributions to our understanding is his study of Daniel chapter 9 verses 24 to 27. He understood that the 70 weeks mentioned in this passage gave a prophetic plan of time for the coming of the Messiah, who we know as Jesus. The weeks represented weeks of years, that is, a week with 7 years of 360 prophetic days each. Therefore 70 weeks would be 7 times 70 or 490 years. He showed that the Messiah was cut off at the end of the 69th week, but the 70th week, a period of 7 years, remains a future event. Many of the interpretations of Daniel 9 that have since been undertaken owe a lot to the work of Sir Edward Denny. Sir Edward also found an important principle of Bible chronology. When Jesus was asked by Peter how many times he should forgive his brother, Jesus replied 70 times 7. Matthew chapter 18 verse 21 to 22. Then came Peter to him and said, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus saith unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. From this Sir Edward reasoned that 490 is a significant number in terms of God's forgiveness of his people, and that God's redemptive grace in history has happened over cycles of 490 years. However, these cycles are redemptive years that are recognized by God, as opposed to years when Israel in particular went away from God, and those years are not recognized by God. Sir Edward discovered what he called the chronology of redemption. Leviticus chapter 25 states that the year of Jubilee is to be celebrated every 50th year. Leviticus chapter 25 verses 9 to 10. Then shalt thou cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the day of atonement shall ye make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. Ye shall hallow the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family. However, the Jubilee year actually started in the middle of the 49th year and finished halfway through the first year of the next Jubilee cycle. Thus, over a period of 490 years, there would actually be 10 Jubilee years included. Sir Edward believed that 500 years in a Jubilee cycle was significant. That would be 490 years in terms of redemptive years. He looked for 490-year cycles in the Bible. From creation to Christ, there are, prophetically speaking, 4,000 years. There are then 2,000 years to Christ's return, followed by 1,000 years of his reign on earth. Sir Edward divided the 7,000-year period into time periods of 70 weeks or 490 years. Each time period represented half a millennium, so there were 14 in all. Obviously, half a millennium is 500 years, but Sir Edward is trying to identify the 490 redemptive years recognized by God. The following chart will illustrate some of his thinking. So here we have a chart of the biblical Jubilee cycle that repeated every 49 years that you can read about in Leviticus. So you start off year 1, year 2, year 3 and so on up to year 49. So in this example we've got year 46, 47, 48, 49. Then on the 10th day of the 7th month of year 49, the Jubilee year would start, and it would finish on the 10th day of the 7th month of the first year of the next cycle. So there's really like this invisible year slotted in. So on man's time there's 49 years, but on God's time there's 50 years. So we can see there 50 years is God's time, man's time is 49 plus 1 Jubilee year. God's time is 500 years. Man's time is 490 plus 10 Jubilee years. God's time is 1,000 years. Man's time is 980 plus 20 Jubilee years, and so on. So God sees time differently than we do. To illustrate how the cycle worked, we will look at one 490-year period from the Exodus to the completion of Solomon's temple. 1 Kings chapter 6 verse 1 tells us that there were 480 years from the Exodus to the time when Solomon commenced work on the temple in Jerusalem. And it came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziph, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord. It then took another 3 years to complete the temple and a further 7 years to furnish it, making 490 years altogether. Here we have an example of Sir Edward's 490-year redemption cycle. However, if you go through the Bible adding up the different years, judges, foreign domination, and kings, there are actually 621 years in this period. So how do you reconcile the two? 490 years or 621 years? Well, Sir Edward believed in unreckoned periods of human rebellion, which God does not include in his prophetic timeline. During the period between the Exodus and the start of the temple, there were 131 years when the people of Israel were rebellious against God and were under foreign domination. If you subtract 131 from 621, it brings you back to 490 years. That is redemption years. Here we see that in his plan, God only counts redemption years where man counts actual years. In this way, Sir Edward divided history into 490-year chunks of time that were recognized by God and omitted the years where God's purposes were resisted, such as the time between the birth of Ishmael and the birth of Isaac. In order to understand God's prophetic timeline, we have to discount the dark periods and only count those years where God's purposes are fulfilled. To quote Sir Edward himself from his chart, The Cycle of 70 Weeks, the truth is, the eye of the Lord, looking away from the other dark ages of man's sorrowful history, rests only on that to which it can turn with comfort. The following chart illustrates how Sir Edward split up the history of the world into what he called the great divisions of time. So he's divided it into 4 periods. As you can see, 2,000-year period from Adam to Abraham's birth, which included 4 of his 490-year cycles. It was a 2,000-year period from Adam to Christ's birth, 2,000 years from Christ's death to his second coming, which we know as the church age, and then the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. Sir Edward saw time as being divided into different segments that were multiples of 7 or weeks. He saw weeks of days, weeks of years, 70 weeks of years, and a 10-fold period of 70 weeks. This last period encapsulated all of Jewish history, but excluded the 2,000 years age of the church between the 2 advents of Christ. The following chart illustrates this. So we have the period that we've looked at, the And we have a 49-day period between Passover and Pentecost, plus one extra day of the day of Pentecost, making 50 days. We have the 7 weeks of years, which is the 49-year Jubilee cycle plus the 1 year of Jubilee. Then we have a 70 weeks of years, which is the 490-year period that runs through history, plus the 10 Jubilees, making 500 years in God's sight. And then we have the tenfold period of 70 weeks, which is the whole course of human history between from Adam to the time of Christ, plus which is 4,000 years, plus the millennial reign, which is 1,000 years, which makes it 5,000 years, but it doesn't include the 2,000-year church age. So that's basically how he saw time. So Edward was the first to recognise the Jubilee periods as the building blocks of God's timetable. He is little remembered, but his insights remain very relevant today. It seems to be getting harder to get hold of Sir Edward's work. You could try looking for Sir Edward Denny's Forgiveness 70 and Sevenfold Companion to 2 Prophetical Charts on Amazon. But as I write, this is out of stock. I did see a reprint for sale on abooks.co.uk. If you want to find out more about the Jubilee cycle and prophecy in general, you can find out more at prophecy-workshop.com, the Prophecy Workshop website. Thank you for listening.